This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. This is episode 243. And we're in Atascadero, California. And Ryan and Jackie Fields from Wild Fields Brewhouse are with me on this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Ryan and Jackie.
Thanks for having us. We're stoked to be here.
So excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you all. I was out here last summer actually filming some classes with the Firestone Walker folks. And I thought, it would be great to go podcast with you all. But I don't know that anyone like our broader brewing audience would have been as familiar. I've been following your work, Ryan, from the Beachwood Blendery days and some beers that had scored incredibly highly with our blind panel, beers that ended up being beers of the year for craft beer and brewing. And so when you decided to leave Beachwood and get out here and open up your own brewery, I was excited to see what happened there. But I wasn't sure the broader audience would have been with us then. And then this year, we're in Minneapolis for the Craft Brewers Conference and World Beer Cup, and you won an unprecedented 4 gold medals, something that had never been done before in the World Beer Cup.
By a craft brewery. Big beer has done it, and that's okay. But craft beer, it changes the game. It means we're just as good.
There you go. And you did it with some interesting styles, including 2 different brown ales. I can't wait to talk about brown ale. I don't know that we've ever talked about brown ale here on the podcast, but we will definitely talk about some brown ale today.
No, we're definitely stoked that we won. It definitely has been helping us get the word out. I mean, we definitely have like a tight following of people that we met in the beer industry and people that have followed us, but we're definitely still up and coming and trying to make a name for ourselves and make Wild Fields a thing. So it's huge for us just to be able to have that recognition.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I can't wait to talk, like I said, about brown ale, about Scottish ale. We can talk a little bit about Mexican lager, because that's another one that you've won for. We definitely want to talk about wild and sour beer, because I think some of the work that you've done in that is some of the best that we've ever tasted in the United States. Absolutely phenomenal, beautiful beers. And I'm not overhyping or overstating that. I do legitimately believe that. Anyway, we'll talk about all of those things. But first, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by BSG, exclusive distributors of Rahr Malting Company. Since 1847, Rahr Malt has been a benchmark of quality and consistency for brewers. From the 19th century through today's craft beer pioneers. Whether you're creating classic lagers, resin-clouded hazies, or barrel-aged behemoths, inspired malts like Rahr North Star Pils, malted oats, and more are here to make your brewing dreams a reality. Get in touch today at go.bsgcraft.com/contact-us. And we are here in the brewery, and there's some brewery sounds in the background, but I love hearing brewery sounds these days, because after so much time in COVID where we had to do these remotely, it feels really good to be back in the brewery.
We're in real life right now.
For sure. And it's been a fantastic weekend for me, coming off of the Firestone Walker Invitational, a phenomenal event, one of my very favorite beer festivals in the entire world, and a great excuse for me to come to central coast of California every year. And I had a wonderful afternoon drinking some wine with some brewer friends, and here we are right now. Talk to me about Wild Fields and the origin of that, but then, and as a product of both of your collective craft beer experiences. Both of you together have worked extensively in craft beer, and and now this is the opportunity to build your own brewery, and not just brewery, but also tap room and family entertainment center. It's an incredibly fun brewery tap room where, with big tables that's geared towards families and kids, and not a rarefied or pretentious beer experience. And the beers you make are accessible and broad and open to all this. So talk to me about this kind of history, those arcs that you all have taken through craft beer to end up right here.
Yeah, well, I think we always kind of knew we wanted to start our own brewery. I mean, a lot of people dream about it. I don't think that we really got serious about it till we met and knew that we were going to be together forever. And we both had such a passion for beer, and we both had such like different skill sets in that field, and had just started networking so much. It just seemed like the kind of natural progression. And I would say, in a nutshell, I mean, we took a lot of inspiration from our time working at Pizza Port, and we just thought it was such a great model, and thought it would, like, that kind of vibe would fit so well up here, because Atascadero is such a family-oriented town, and it's hard when you have kids. I mean, we have 2 kids, and it's hard when you have kids to go out and find a place where you can have a good time, bring your kids, and not have to worry about them, and have it be fun for everyone. So
you all are answering the kids and brewery question with a very clear statement of yes, that this place is very specifically designed for families to be friendly for them.
We went to New Zealand with our 2-year-old daughter, and it was the best experience. Like, if the U.S. and Pizza Port hadn't already confirmed that kind of, we love this vibe, traveling with a child, and you walk into pubs and they just have huge like secret gardens for children attached to them, and swings and things, and you're just like, this is exactly what we think is important.
Right.
Because I don't care if you're in my pub to drink or not, but everyone should feel like this is normal, and this is great, and this is wonderful, and kids shouldn't be excluded from those environments.
Breweries used to be these cultural centers of a city, you know, a place where everyone can meet. And like historically, we just felt like that's what it used to be. And I think America somewhere lost its way and treats alcohol like the thing you hide in the corners like, don't tell your kids about it. And it's like, we want to teach our kids how to responsibly drink, and also have a place where we can drink and hang out with them.
Yeah.
Sure. So Pizza Port, you both worked at Pizza Port?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just start from the beginning. I got my start at Port Brewing, Lost Abbey, right out of college, basically. Actually, before I actually graduated college, I got a job on the bottling line, just part-time. Kind of just right place at the right time. I walked in one night. I was late because my MapQuest directions that I printed out weren't doing me justice, I guess. And walked in late and just kind of started. It was Tommy and some of the bartenders, and they were drinking. And I walked in and just started drinking with them to buy a bottle of beer. And at one point, one of the bartenders was like, "You're cute. You should work here." And Tommy's like, "We can use another bottling line person." I was like, I sent him my resume the next day and started working on the bottling line, and the rest is kind of history, I guess. It was just one of those right place at the right time moments. I didn't really,
the right guy.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really want to do what I was studying in college, and I was missing passion in my life, and I was like, I think I'm gonna find a new direction anyway. So this was kind of just one of those things where I give it a try, and I saw a lot of potential in the industry, and it was a great growing brewery at the time.
Sure.
So after a year or so of working really hard, I was the lead brewer, doing a lot of barrel work, like just learning as much as I could from Tommy about Belgian sour beer, and also making West Coast IPA all the time, Wipeout and Mongo. So it's just a cool place to like really like learn a lot of information, and also meet a lot of people. I got to like be part of this like tight knit community, and like be introduced to all these people and start networking. Actually, yeah. So I met the people at Beachwood back then, actually, when she was working at Beachwood. And we met right at the end of my Lost Abbey stint, just through a mutual friend, actually, that I was living with and also brewing with. And right after that, a job at Pizza Port opened up, and it was kind of just, I mean, who wouldn't want to be a head brewer at a Pizza Port? It's kind of like the ultimate job, especially when you're working your way up through the industry. Luckily, there wasn't Port Brewing, Lost Abbey is a sister company of Pizza Port, so it was kind of a shoe-in, and there wasn't a lot of people vying for that position, so I got that. And I brewed at Pizza Port San Clemente for 3 years. We moved in together and lived in San Clemente, and After that, I heard rumor that Beachwood was starting a sour facility, and I had missed making Belgian sour beer since I got so much experience at Lost Abbey.
Sure.
And was already kind of thinking about what the next step was going to be. Didn't know if I should like ask Gabe and Julian or like how that worked. And I think I ran into Gabe at a CBC and just kind of like brought it up. And he's like, wait, you're going to like think about leaving Pete'sport? Like, I didn't want to like poach you. And I was like, well, if you want someone to like help you do this, like I totally be down. And he's like, yeah, like let's do it. So they asked me to jump on board and help spearhead the Beachwood Blendery program, which was just an awesome experience to be able to do that. But at the beginning, we knew that we were about to have our first child and wanted to land on the Central Coast to raise our kids and do the family thing up here. So I told him from the beginning, I'm like, I'll give you 5 years. That's as long as we can live in LA County. And we kind of worked out a deal where I'd still be part of the company after I left. And we knew that was the timeline. And it was a great, awesome experience getting to do that. But we knew we wanted to land up here.
So, Jackie, what was your entry into craft beer?
I got a phone call from a dishwasher I had worked with at a Mexican restaurant who was like, hey, do you need a job? And I had tried to become a professional working adult and gotten a job in like a corporate office, and it pays crap for dollars. And I was like, yeah, I could really use a second job. Okay. And he's like, yeah, you should come interview at the spot. And it was in the same town I lived in. And I rode my bike over and I interviewed with Gabe Gordon. If anyone's met Gabe, he's an extremely particular human being. And I literally interviewed with him for like 5 minutes. And I pretty much said, I have OCD and I've been in the service industry a long time and I love it. I just love humans. And he was like, okay, can you show up tomorrow? Like, here's your schedule. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I feel like I told you nothing about me, but let's do this. And I came in for my first night and we had 8 rotating taps
This
of
is
craft
Beachwood
beer.
Seal Beach, by the way.
Yeah, Beachwood before there was a Brewing, Beachwood Barbecue. I got to learn about beer, and I still remember my first night, like, I was like, okay, bye. And he's like, oh, well, do you want a beer? And I was like, I'm 20. And he was just like, like eyeballs got really big. Like, who did I just hire? Shit. You know, I do craft beer. Like, you can't even try it. And, you know, it was like, he exposed me to the style guidelines. And for a 20-year-old, I had this comprehensive package I would refer to, right? And I had a good idea of what these things were, and people would ask me for a brown ale or an IPA or whatever, and I could kind of fake my way through it, and then I would serve it to them and be like, what do you think? And then I would take their feedback and I would use it for other customers. And it was just this really cool process of learning how people digest things and how they explain them and how they went with or without the guidelines. And it was a really cool way, I think, to get into the beer industry and watch them grow. And it paid my way through college. And I'm so lucky. And I ended up at UC Irvine. They have an amazing beer bar there, the Anthill Pub. And I was just like so stoked that I got to commute and do college with a craft beer bar on my campus, and started carrying Ryan's beer on campus from Pizza Port, and that was really fun. And went in a nonprofit for a couple of years when I graduated, but I would get really jealous of Ryan and all the people he got to see and talk to and meet every day. And I was like, gosh darn it, Ryan, I hate you. Like, you're still in it and I'm not, and I want to come back. And so it worked out when I was a nonprofit and we had our daughter, and I was like, I'm just really not happy. Like, I want more. I want to see all the people that we love and our family. And luckily Ryan's sweet and supports me in that. And so I just quit my job from Big Brothers Big Sisters in Orange County and went back to bartending. And the Orange County Brewers Guild opened up a position for executive director. And luckily I got to apply for that. And here we are.
Fantastic. Well, let's pivot and start talking about some of these beers that you all are making right now. But before we do that, supply chain challenges are here to stay for a while. So why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard has partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more of concentrate from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes from various carriers and can stay up to date on the status of your shipment. To get started on a freight quote for craft concentrates today, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, as craft beer's most trusted point of sale system, Arrived is the mobile all-in-one solution you need to decrease service friction and increase guest satisfaction. With a full suite of craft-specific features, no contracts, and no monthly fees, Arrived provides the necessary tools to help your brewery grow. Go to arrived.com/CBB to set up a free customized demo. That's Arrived, ARRYVED.com/CBB. Remember, there is no I in Arrived. And you all use Arrived out there, don't you?
We do.
Yeah.
We love Arrived.
Perfect. Well, let's talk about this. So, you mentioned style and style guidelines. This is something that you all pay a lot of attention to, that, you have a healthy approach to competition, like to win, like to play the game of beer competitions. Obviously, you've got a great strategy around that. We'll talk more about some of that because I think it's an interesting way. We'll leave that till later on. We'll make folks keep listening to the brewing conversation before we circle back to some of the strategic approach that you take to entering competitions, which has obviously and clearly worked for you. But let's talk about some of these beers. Some of the beers you are now known for after winning. When I say this, brown ale is this thing for you. You won a GABF gold medal for it. You won a World Beer Cup, gold medal for it. You won like a California
Craft Brewers Cup,
right?
Also.
And so you have carved out now, coming out of someone who has brewed sour beer for a long time, and also West Coast IPA. Talk to me about this kind of focus on brown ale and what led you to becoming so competitive in that niche of craft beer.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question, and something that maybe I'm still trying to wrap my brain around. It wasn't like you got
to be careful what you win for, because then people are going to expect you to keep making that.
I am stoked that we're winning medals for brown ale, because we're definitely all about classic styles. We're all about beer with balance, and we're all about homebrewers too. Like we do a homebrew competition here, and the winner gets to make their award-winning recipe on our system. And this year we're actually going to package them into cans. So homebrewers always love brown ale because it's just one of those traditional styles. It's great to make on a homebrew system, and it's not something you find a lot too. It's
right.
we're trying to keep some of these traditions alive and make sure we don't get too lost down the rabbit hole of new and trendy and experimental. I mean, we love that too, but we want to make sure we're still respecting the past. And so how did we start winning so many medals for brown ale?
Well, talk to me about that creative process first. As you start thinking about it, you're an experienced brewer. You've been doing this for a number of different ways, but where do you pull from as you start to think about and design not just one but two, English style and American style brown ales? How you're going to build some differentiation there, but how you're also going to take that style that everyone has expectations around and build something that is uniquely compelling through it.
Yeah, so we actually brewed the Three Bridges American Brown Ale first. That was a beer we made pretty soon after we opened, and I just knew I wanted to have some dark malty beers on. I wanted to kind of test the waters of a Tascadero in this area and see how they reacted to that. And I thought it was winter, I think, so I'm I want to make a pretty heavy duty brown, something that is malty. It's got some chocolatey notes, a little bit of bitterness. So I went with the American style brown for that, and it went over really well. And at that point, there wasn't really a competition at all on hold at that point, because we opened 3 months before the pandemic hit. So we're just scrounging to survive. I wasn't really thinking a lot about competition at that moment. We were just in survival mode. So as time went on, we made our other brown ale, the Pine Mountain Monolith, which is the one that we won for English style brown. And that was during the summer. And okay, we made this kind of winter brown. I want to make something that's going to be good for summer. And a monolith had just popped up on top of a mountain that's actually walking distance from our brewery. And it was one of the first 5 of these steel alien monolith thing. So we actually got some Atascadero got some global recognition for that. We were in the Guardian, and there's a little bit of buzz about it. So we're like, let's kind of use this buzz and like make a cool beer. And we had already decided that brown ales were going to be all kind of like trail themed beers for us. Like local spots around town. So we called it Pine Mountain Monolith, and it was summer. So I'm like, let's make it a little lighter. Let's not go as heavy on the chocolate. Let's not go as heavy on the bitterness. Let's make it like just super drinkable, something that you can just like really approachable. I'd say all our beers are definitely on the approachable balance side, but like even more so. So we made the Pine Mountain Monolith. It was a huge hit. I wasn't like necessarily planning on it being like an English style brown. I was just like, I just want to make a brown that is more on the approachable side, and it had a lot of like nutty notes to it, and it wasn't necessarily overly estery, and it just had a lot of flavor but drinkability. And that was one that I kind of just threw in GABF kind of last minute, and it wasn't really like one I was banking on, honestly. And when it won, I was like, because we did not use English style yeast. We used California ale yeast for that, and it wasn't super Englishy, I would say, but it did have the like perfect like nuttiness, like it almost like smell like hazelnuts on it. So it was one of those that I tossed in there. I just knew it was a great drinking beer, and I was like, okay, let's see if the judges think this is appropriate for the category, and it is proven that
Sure.
is what they're looking for. So that was one that I didn't necessarily go in banking on, but was one that definitely has stuck, and I was like, okay, that this is working for us. So after that one, World Beer Cup comes around, and I'm like, well, we keep nailing this brown ale. Maybe I'll try another brown ale category. Let's go for the American brown. And that one was definitely much more targeted. Like when I brewed that Three Bridges brown, I was like, the whole time I was really shooting for American style brown and really trying to nail the balance of chocolate and bitterness. And like, so we used the Cascade hops in it at a decent rate to try to get that nice kind of citrusy hop bitterness in there, but also the right amount of chocolate. So it really just combines into that perfect balance, and also just have a crisp finish. We use Cal Ale for that too. So everything we do is definitely on the drier, crisper side. And evidently that just tends to work well for the judging panels.
You know, when you're talking about a judging panel made up of professional brewers, then something that is dry and well structured like that is almost certainly going to appeal to them more than something that might be a little bit sweeter and a little more loose in the in the sip. But I'm curious about this. You mentioned like a hazelnut flavor. Talk to me about building malt flavor, because you don't have a ton of pieces to work with in this. Hops have to be pretty restrained. You want it to be dry and crisp, but you also want to build some heft and some kind of substance in that body and flavor. Without having a whole bunch of levers to pull. So how do you go about doing that? How do you select base malt and then layer in some specialty malts to kind of build that malt body?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I tend not to be too restrictive as far as like worrying about overdoing it on the malt side, because I know just the way our process works here, it's going to be dry, it's going to be crisp. Like I never have a problem with a beer being not dry enough. If anything, I'm like trying to build back and saying, let's get some body. Let's like try to do as much as we can to not have it be too dry. So I throw in, we start with a nice layer of Maris Otter and just get that nice kind of base breadiness. I'm a huge fan of Cara Munich Type 3. That is just like quickly become one of my favorite malts. And I think that just has enough heft to get you some of those flavors. But you can use it pretty judiciously and not worry about it being overpowering. And then just having the right type of chocolate malt and the right balance of that is important. One thing we've been really focusing on here that I hadn't really focused on a lot in the past is water chemistry. Starting this place, I got super nerdy, geeky on just like water chemistry, and just the water here is not ideal for brewing. So we had to get a RO unit, and I didn't want to use 100% RO. So we blend a different ratio of carbon filtered city water with our reverse osmosis water for every single batch. And I think water chemistry is really what takes a good brewer and makes them a great brewer, for sure. Like it took it, at least that's for my case. I think that The clean beers I was making at Pizza Port were good, but really utilizing water chemistry is what really like ramped up, like it took me to the next level. So I think having and just kind of studying the different types of water people are using in different parts of the world and historically what they're using, and also just understanding what the water is going to do to the beer, it really allows you to make maybe bitterness be a forefront, or maybe have it be the maltiness come through, and just playing with that has been huge for us for sure.
How how impactful and at what kind of blend levels or thresholds do you start seeing those significant differences then in water? You mentioned that you're blending carbon filtered city water, which has a lot of bicarbonate and a pretty high number of total dissolved solids, back in with this RO water. But like where in those that kind of percentages of blends do you start seeing very significant differences, and what else are you then doing to kind of finish off some of these water profiles?
Yeah, so we go anywhere.
Is there 5% difference, 10% difference? Like, how impactful really, where are those threshold points?
I mean, we're not hitting the 1% mark on accuracy. It's like the way I do it is like as accurate as I can be with the system we have. So I would say as long as I'm getting within a 5% range on what I'm targeting, I'm sure it's good enough. But we're going anywhere from like 90% RO, 10% city water on like a Pilsner, to 0% RO, 100% city water for like a huge imperial stout. And that's to the point where we don't even have to buffer with chalk or pickling lime or anything, because there's so much bicarbonate in the water. It's just handling that roasted malt fine.
Sure.
And then everywhere in between, like a brown ale might be 50-50. I would say our average beer, if I was just going to pick one blend, is 85% RO, 15% city water. That's probably what's getting me closest to like what we're brewing with down in Southern California, I would say probably.
Sure. Are there any other additions then that you make to that?
Yeah, so we take that and then add, usually it's just 3. It's gypsum, calcium chloride, lactic acid. And not always lactic acid if we're doing darker beers, because you don't need to acidify. But
right.
Usually it's just a blend of those 3. Pickling lime sometime if we're doing like a mega stout. Just to buffer on the pH side.
You are also paying attention to the total amount of total dissolved solids in this water.
I don't actually go and test it. I use a Brewing water, which is a pretty popular program that is awesome, and the book water that the Brewers Association put out,
right.
And that one is definitely helpful too, and. Yeah, it's a lot of it is starting with the science, but finishing with the actual experience and flavor and trial and error. So I start with the program and start with the ideal elements, but after I start brewing a few batches, it becomes more trial and error, and becomes more what does this need more? Does this need less? How was this the last batch? Was it too hoppy? Was it not hoppy enough? Was it too acidic? Did the pH turn out right on this mash? And I look at my notes eventually more often than the program once I start brewing beers over and over again, because really you can compute something all you want, but the reality of it is does it taste good or not?
Right.
And how do we go from here? So.
And you just tweak and tweak and tweak. Talk to me about the hops. You mentioned you're using Cascade hops in the American brown ale. Clearly you want to get a smooth integrated hop character to this. Are there any hot side techniques that you're using with hopping, or is there a way that you're selecting some of these Cascade?
For the brown ale, not necessarily, because you're looking just for bitterness and some whirlpool hop addition, and there's not like
whirlpool hop addition in your brown ale.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think we whirlpool hop addition almost every single beer that we do. I don't know that I don't put it's just something that I got accustomed to doing. I think because there is bitterness that you're getting from the whirlpool. But you're also just getting some flavor pickup too that you're not necessarily getting if you're just boiling the hops for 90 minutes.
Right.
We also do a 90-minute boil on every beer that we do too.
Why?
We really like clear beer, and I think having that like just really vigorous long boil really helps the clarity and just getting all those proteins out of solution. You're boiling off a lot of other things that you don't necessarily want in there, DMS precursors and stuff like that. I've never seen any negative effects from boiling longer, so it just has worked. It's kind of one of those things where it's more of just one of those things I picked up along the way, like tricks of the trade, than necessarily exact scientific reason why I'm doing that.
You just decided to make your brew day longer, and
there's always stuff to do. So having a little bit extra time actually can sometimes help when you're having meetings and you're ordering ingredients and people are walking in the door and giving tours. Like maybe that extra half hour actually helps you get things done and not be stressed out on time. So
fair enough. How do you split up your hops between earlier hot side additions and whirlpool?
It depends.
General percentage kind of.
Yeah, it depends on the beer. I mean, I have an IBU calculator that a friend let me use that I just kind of put the efficiency that I think I'm going to get based on that addition and how much IBU we're going to get. And usually it's kind of split up pretty evenly across the board. Like I probably get pretty equal amounts of IBU from first edition, middle edition, and whirlpool typically. A lot of the IPAs these days, we are definitely going heavier on the whirlpool, even on the IBU pickup, depending on the beer. If I want to make like a really, really approachable IPA that's maybe going to appeal to some of the people that don't really like bitterness as much in their IPAs, we'll put a very small amount and boil and do a huge whirlpool edition and then huge dry hop edition. Also doing what a lot of people are doing these days, cooling down the whirlpool a little bit before adding the whirlpool hops. So you're really just kind of maximizing flavor and aroma and not extracting too much bitterness out of it.
How much do you cool it down before you?
I don't go too crazy. Usually I'm shooting for between 190 and 200 on like the hoppy beers. And I don't put it through our heat exchanger either. I'll just actually add cold RO water to top up in order to get that cooling down.
So it's interesting that you are whirlpool hopping your brown ale.
Well, I mean, even in the style guidelines for American brown ale, they say that dry hopping is actually common for that style, which I think that would go a little too far for the beer, for at least for our beer. I'm sure it could work if I want to make it work, but at that point, after making it, I tried it in the fermenter. I'm like, does this need dry hop? And I'm like, I don't think so. Like a brown ale, even an American brown ale, only needs to be so hoppy. So, but the style guidelines clearly say like there needs to be some hop character there. So I think in order to get hop character and not just bitterness, you gotta add some whirlpool.
Then when you get into fermentation on this, how do you handle fermentation on the brown ales? You mentioned you're just using Chico.
We are still struggling through getting out of the pandemic, so we're not like out there like spending tons of money buying all these fancy yeast strains. So we basically have two yeast strains that we use in house. We have a lager strain and an ale strain, and we pretty much make all of our beers with those two strains because it just maximizes the financial efficiency of the brewery. So we do a pretty standard fermentation. I'm not looking for a ton of yeast byproduct flavors in these beers. We're looking for the malt and the water and the hops to do their thing. And Cal Ale just is a workhorse, and it just does what we need it to do, and it does a great beer and kind of gets out of the way and
keep it in normal fermentation temperature ranges for the yeast.
Yeah, just everything's pretty standard when it comes to most of our fermentations on the Cal Ale side.
The no dry hopping. How do you then finish and polish the beer up at the very end? Clearly, if you're trying to appeal to I shouldn't say that you're only trying to appeal to judges in a competition, because also it needs to sell and appeal to an audience right here in your tap room. But you want a pretty beer, and it should be pretty if it's going to stand out in a competition or be poured in a glass here.
Yeah, so we send everything to a bright tank. We have a bunch of unjacketed bright tanks in a cold box and force carbonate in there, and we add biofine we biofine most of our beers. We don't do any filtration other than that. I find that just allowing the beer to sit in the bright tank for a period of time, and then usually pulling off the side port first. We're not in a rush to like crank out beer through our bright tanks, at least at this point. So it can sit in there. We can pull off the side port for the first few kegs, and then by the time a week or two have gone by, then we could drain the tank from the bottom, and that has worked fine for us so far. I'm not a huge proponent of filtration, especially on like in the pub type scenario.
Right.
I just don't find it super necessary because we're not in like a huge rush to produce massive amounts of beer, so it can sit a little longer. And I always just had this impression like there's just too much possible chance for oxygen pickup. And if there's one thing I'm paranoid about when it comes to making beer, it's oxygen pickup. That's on the sour beer side and the clean beer side. I feel like that's like the one, like if you can minimize oxygen at every single stage, that's going to be huge for flavor quality, for stability, for longevity. Yeah. So that's anything I can do to prevent oxidation, we're going to do.
If you were thinking about both of these brown ales, what do you think are the pieces as judges are judging them that set them apart? You know, like these are well-trod categories, styles that everybody's, familiar with and has been with, for decades and decades. Standing out in something like that, it's not something you're going to stand out from with the newest, flashiest hop or the perfect hop combination, or the yeast that's creating, free thiols that, create a very unique flavor to it. It's not operating in any of those kinds of ways. It's, what do you think, is that differentiator for your brown ales and that thing that kind of makes them stand out amongst, a crowd with other brown ales?
Yeah, that's a good question. With the Pine Mountain, at first, like I said, I kind of just threw that in there and just didn't necessarily think it was the perfect English brown ale of all time. Yeah, it's just a blend of a lot of different things that you have to think about. I wouldn't say I could pinpoint it on one thing. Definitely just balance and drinkability. So, and that comes to down to water chemistry, I think. So having the right water chemistry, having a beer that's bold enough to stand out, but not so bold that it's not to style, for sure helps. So the English brown ale, the American brown ale has like a decent amount of bitterness and a decent amount of chocolate. I mean, it's a bold beer, but it's definitely still to style. So being able to stand out a little bit in that realm, and then just making sure you're packaging it right, and minimizing, like just making sure it lasts, because it's got to. The beer is only fresh for so long, and like we do turn over a good amount of beer, but I mean, we're sending a competition, it sits in a bottle for at least 3 months, and we're not necessarily making brown ale every month, so it's got to be able to hold up for an extended period of time and still taste like it did when you first released it. So
are there any tools? I mean, you mentioned oxygen obviously is the biggest one, and that's the thing. You want to eliminate that in your process in order to make it stand up. Or is there something to other ingredient choice or other process around this that you find adds to that longevity?
Making sure it stays cold, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily for the competition side, the Central Coast Brewers Guild always gets a refrigerated truck that we can the beer always stays cold the entire time it's being held at a certain brewery and then transported over to the competition. We, with our self-distribution around locally, don't have to worry too much about it because we can just go straight from our cold box to someone else's. So that's important. And then, working with our distributor to make sure that they're taking care of it too. Just, making sure it stays cold is huge. And then oxygen pickup. I mean, that's kind of the two big ones, honestly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I love that we've been able to talk about brown ale because, like I said, it's something that I don't think we've ever really talked about significantly here on the podcast. But I do want to talk about sour beer because I think you've developed some very innovative processes in that scope of your work at, going back to Lost Abbey and then Beachwood Blendery. And I want to dig in on some of that. You also, through Beachwood, have proved out that you can make spontaneously fermented beer even in a very warm climate if you approach it, with a strategy like you have. I want to talk about all of those things, but first, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brewhouse to the integrated hopbacks on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brewhouses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented working with world-renowned industry veterans and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. So let's talk a little bit about sour beer. It's not a big part of what you do here at Wild Fields, but it's certainly something that you love and have a passion for. You've got some smaller projects going on here, still, because you couldn't give it up completely. But talk to me about, about getting into that space and trying to build out a program at Beachwood Blendery and make spontaneous beer in the greater metropolitan Los Angeles area, an area that is not known for the cold temperatures of the Sun Valley, that does not, get into the kind of historical temperature ranges that, some have insisted are necessary for spontaneous fermentation and lambic style beer. And you all figured out how to not just do that, but do it at an incredibly flavorful level, making some of the most interesting American spontaneous beers that we've tasted. Talk to me about building that and how you all went about making fantastic beer in a place that most might have thought you couldn't do it.
Yeah, for sure. First off, I will mention that when I was at Blendery, I would say like a pretty small percentage of the beer we made was actually 100% spontaneous. It was probably about 10% of the project.
Okay.
The majority of the project was just focused on the end goal, which was like making flavors and aromas that were comparable to the stuff the Belgians were doing. And that was going to be any way that we could, any process we could. So starting there, most of the beer is like a house culture that we propagated through the barrels. And then we knew the spontaneous part was going to be a wild card. It was going to take a long time to figure out and kind of piece together. So that was always kind of a smaller piece that was like slowly growing as we were dialing it in. And I think what it comes down to is the fact that Beachwood and Gabe and Julian allowed me to take lots of risks. Like, it was a risky endeavor. It wasn't the kind of brewery you start from scratch as just like the first thing you do and you're putting all your eggs in this basket. I mean, we were able to do that at the Blendery because we had Beachwood the rest of the Beachwood backing us up, and yeah,
the Beachwood wasn't going to live or die on the success of the Beachwood Blendery.
Exactly.
It was very much an R&D project that,
it allowed us to take some risks and be able to dump some beer down the drain if we needed to. And that was definitely part of the learning process, especially on the spontaneous side. The first batch of spontaneous beer that we ever did, just going for it, was the entire batch got super enterobactery. It smelled like rotten cabbage. And immediately we knew that batch was not going to work. So we were back to the drawing board on like, okay, it's going to take a little bit more than just buying a cool ship to make spontaneous beer in Long Beach. So, the first year was definitely pretty rough because developing a house culture that's going to do what you want it to do or figuring out the spontaneous, it wasn't a thing that was well known. It wasn't like something that everyone was doing or well documented in the process. So we kind of had to pave our way and like figure out what we're going to do. So the main thing we did was just kind of threw everything we could at it. So any way I could get a new culture, I would try to throw it in the mix and see what worked and what didn't. So like growing up bottled rigs, buying all the different strains from every yeast lab we could get, finding like home brewers that had really good sour beer strains that they wanted to like pitch in and kind of be part of the process, and just like anything we could to try to figure it out. And I think over time we just like kind of found what worked and what didn't, and pretty soon we had barrels that were tasting great, and we just started propagating those, and it was just this evolving process through the barrels where the culture's alive in the barrel, and you're handpicking the best. It's like natural selection, right? So this barrel evolved in a good way, so we're going to propagate that one, and so did this one, and you're just kind of pulling from all these barrels and propagating other barrels, and pretty soon you just start going down this path where it evolves into what you want it to be through that. And then also just blending, lots and lots of blending, and figuring out how to utilize different elements of different barrels to put together the pieces of the puzzle into the whole. So you're sitting there on blending day and you're not necessarily tasting individual barrels that are exactly what you want or amazing, but if you know how to put them together, it can become greater than the parts. The whole can be greater than the sum of its parts. So that was also something we learned kind of how to do along the way.
Sure. Talk to me about optimizing. One of the things I was always impressed with is the kind of expression of funk in those beers. Talk to me about working with that culture to steer it in that direction to produce, because I think that's one piece that kind of distinguishes your beer, that having that blend, that the balance of funk and acidity, keeping the acidity light, but also kind of amplifying that funky element to it is, that's what made those stand out. And nailing the funk is one of the biggest challenges I think a lot of American sour beer brewers face.
Totally agree. And getting the funk, we realized pretty quickly. At first, when I sat there, I thought, okay, turbid mash, that's what these beers are all about. That's what we're going to have to figure out. And quickly realized that you don't necessarily need to do the perfect turbid mash. As long as you get a grain bill and a wort that's high in starches and it's not going to be super fermentable, like that puts you on the right path. What we realized was actually the most important piece was aged hops. And that was just huge in the process of dialing in the funk and acidity, because what happens is IBU is going to inhibit bacterial production. So your IBU level is basically going to control your acidity in a lot of ways. You also have to develop a culture that's going to be IBU tolerant. You can't just have some lactobacillus that you put in 0 IBU wort and assume that that's going to end at the right acidity level. That's just going to probably get either 0 acidity or way too much acidity. So we developed a culture of pediococcus, which is much more IBU tolerant. It's a little more restrained on the acidity and like slower moving. It doesn't have these wild swings that lactobacillus does. And we developed a strain of pedio that was IBU tolerant. And then basically dialing in the bitterness is what lets you dial in the funk and the acidity, because you're getting a lot of the funk from the aged hops and the interaction the Brett has with the aged hops. And it's also controlling the acidity for you. So luckily, we were able to test a bunch of our bottles and Belgian bottles at a lab and kind of like start to see where the perfect IBU level is. And it's tricky because you never know exactly how much bitterness your aged hops are going to give you, because they're aged. So they're not going to. It's hard. It's not something you can just calculate on paper like you can with the fresh hops, where you got the exact alpha acid percentage, and that's what's going to kind of dictate the IBU.
How'd you go about doing it then?
So luckily, right when I started Blendery, Peter Hoey from BSG had done this experimental lambic blend hop where he took a bunch of old bales that were about to get thrown away because they were just like too old. And he's like, wait, instead of just tossing these, why don't we age them some more, blend them up, pelletize them, and make this like potentially useful hop pellet that people can use for lambic inspired beer or sour beer. So that was like right when we started. So we tried it out, immediately realized that this was a good thing, and basically bought all of it to some people's dismay, I think.
Oh no.
But at that point, I immediately started, Peter had left, I think, pretty soon after that. So I immediately started bugging Jim Wiggins about making more. And like, you got to get another batch going, man. We're gonna need some more here pretty soon. And they did. They made another batch of it. And so we actually didn't have to age our own hops. We didn't have to use whole hops. So we got this awesome pelletized version that has, in my opinion, worked great. And I know other hop producers have been doing it too. So I don't want to like just praise BSG as being only people doing this. I know that there's some other people out there that are experimenting with the same process and the same thing. But yeah, finding the right age.
Not an issue then, I mean, obviously whole cone hops are the romantic choice of lambic brewers. Mechanically speaking, your pelletized hops didn't ruin everything.
No, well, the beauty of it, they were aged whole hops all the way up until pelletized, and so it's not like they aged pellets. You can't really age pellets. I wouldn't suggest doing that. We tried it at Blendery. We did a bunch of different experiments with everything, and the aging pellets didn't really work. But having
just not enough oxygen interaction.
Yeah, just the bitterness just held up too well in the pellets. Yeah, and you don't get really enough of that degradation. But yeah, it's just much easier using pellets from a brewery efficiency standpoint, and just the fact that these worked out well kind of took one big process off the plate for us, and we were able to kind of utilize that.
I love watching various sour beer brewers hop aging programs, and have walked out to the barn, and climbed up with Jeff, the Jester King, and shaken out some of the bags that they're aging outdoors up in their little barn. And Matt Tarpey at the Vale has a really cool multi-layered system where they just kind of toss and rotate through, and have a kind of average age then of hops that gets older, but almost like a Solera method of adding new aged hops in and blending them all in, and then trying to turn them so that everything gets exposed to air. That's fascinating, the lengths that folks are going to on that.
I do think that is fun, and I definitely think that's a great thing to do if you have time and the energy, and
but you guys were starting without having that stock and needed to.
Yeah, I mean, we probably would be doing that if it wasn't for BSG coming out with that product.
Yeah.
Because you gotta get aged hops somehow. So like I said, aging pellets wasn't the way to do it. So you gotta. The thing about making funky sour beer is there's no one way to do it, and none of us are doing it the exact same way.
Right.
And you really got to find what works for you. There's not one. It's not like making brown ale where there's kind of like one, or just ale, like clean ales in general, where there's kind of like a pretty consistent process we're all doing. Like, you got to find what works for your brewery, what works for you, what works for where you're at, what things you have to your disposal, and what you're looking for in your beer as well.
Yeah. So then you develop this. Aged hops are a key thing. You've got this culture, and you go through this natural selection process with it, where the barrels that produce the best tasting beers are ones that you then use to inoculate more barrels, and ones that don't get pulled out, and they don't get, the culture, is a evolutionary dead end at that point.
Yeah.
But those cultures also keep moving even as you're doing that. Like, you can inoculate with this great culture, and things can shift. How once you got something that you were really happy with, how did you work to maintain that?
I would say overall, it just, as long as you're picking from the barrels that were good, the barrels tend to still be good. I will say one thing: if a barrel is tasting good, use it right away. Don't necessarily think, oh, we'll save this for 2 more years and use it for this blend down the future because it's such a good barrel, it's only going to get better. I found that usually if a barrel's tasting good, that's when it's probably peaking. It's only going to get worse. And a barrel that might not be very good, they're going to use instead, actually might be better in 2 years. So if you give that barrel that's not tasting good more time, you never know. That could actually end up being a great barrel. So use the beer when it's good. And also part of the process, on top of the things that we already talked about, was massively underpitching. Like, we're talking like uncomfortably underpitching.
Dangerously.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like almost not even
Fear-inducing.
fermenting. Like, oh wow, it's been 8 days and there's like no sign of fermentation. But that day 9, and all of a sudden, there it goes.
He comes home every day like, oh my God, it hasn't pitched yet. And
But
but it pitched today, babe.
You start getting comfortable with it over time. At first, it was kind of nerve-wracking. You're like, we got to, like, I know spontaneous fermentation, how many cells are getting in there, right? Like, you're doing the math in your head, and you're like thinking, how many actual cells of yeast could have got into a spontaneous batch of beer? So how can we mimic that in a more controlled way? And you have to just you have to try to get as little cells in there as possible with still having it start fermenting. And I will say that no matter what, as long as it starts fermenting, it always finishes out. I never had a barrel stall once it starts fermenting. So, and reading all these books that other people had written, like the Lambic book, I'm blanking on the author of it, but they talk about in Belgium how when they take samples of readings off of barrels, and like the fermentation takes months, 6 months, a year, to really get that full fermentation. So if you put a huge pitch of yeast into a barrel, it's going to ferment in a week or two. So that's not the goal.
In terms of temperature, how did you? I know you mentioned you've mentioned before that you all put temperature probes in at Cantillon to kind of measure temperature swings and see what kind of arc those things took.
Yeah, so we went out on a limb, and Jean and Roy had visited the brewery right before we opened, actually, for Shelton Brothers Fest. And I don't know if we asked them then or another time, but Gabe just went out on a limb and said, "Hey, can we throw some temperature recorders in your cellar?" And he's like, "Yeah." So he threw 2 temperature recorders, one in the main floor and one in the basement, and we had an entire year's worth of temperature data recorded from Cantillon's barrel cellar. So at Blendery, we're really going for lambic inspired beer, and that was the mission. I spent every day just making one beer, and that was the whole goal. So we put in some air conditioning units, and basically had a complete control of the barrel room temperature all year round. And we kind of utilized the data we had and kind of what we thought would work, and just try to and control the temperature in that building, which I know not everyone necessarily has the opportunity to do, and that's not what we're doing here at Wild Fields.
Sure.
I do think that temperature plays an important role. Seeing some of the temperature swings at Cantillon weren't huge, and it did get decently warm in the summer. And after my experience, I don't think that temperature. I think you want some temperature swings because it's going to give certain organisms their time to shine based on their preferred temperature.
Right.
But I don't think you're necessarily going to ruin a beer from temperature alone. So you don't want it to get overly warm. You don't want it to get above 80 degrees for like a super extended period of time. But if you can not leave that barrel, if you leave that barrel alone and not bother it, that barrel can just sit and not be moved and be topped up once, it'll probably be fine. I think the main thing people do is they move their barrels too much, and they taste their barrels too much, and they bug them too much, and barrels just want to be left alone. They just, yeah. And
like Ryan Fields.
Yeah, like me. Because your biggest enemy is oxygen. And I said that before, oxygen is not your friend. And when you taste your barrel, some oxygen's getting in there. When you move the barrel, it's splashing around, you're disturbing the pellicle. And that's the biggest issue, I think, is because oxygen is going to favor the production of acetic acid, because there's always acetobacter in there. Whether or not it produces acetic acid is mainly based on how much oxygen is in there. So if you add a bunch of oxygen into your barrel, acetobacter is going to be happy. It's going to make a bunch of acetic acid. That acetic acid is going to get turned into ethyl acetate, and you're going to end up with nail polish remover and vinegar. And no one wants to drink that.
No one.
I mean, some people do, I guess, but
some people do.
We don't like to drink that.
We don't drink it. We dump it.
You also did a bunch of lab work to understand what organisms were working and doing the kind of fermentation and flavor creation work in these beers. Talk to me a little bit about taking that kind of analytical approach to try to understand what was doing what and when.
Yeah. So first off, I will say, if you do have a Brewers Association membership, you can access. I did a CBC seminar all about just the data that we collected and all about the kind of the things I learned at Beachwood. And so that's available on the Brewers Association website. And there's also
that was 2019 CBC, right? In Denver?
2018.
2018?
No, 2019? 2018.
2018.
No, 2019. It was 2019. Yep. It's right before we opened.
Okay.
Yeah, 2019. And there is also a little paper I wrote up on that's floating around the internet somewhere. If you type in Ryan Fields, Beachwood Blendery, lambic inspired, it might pop up. So yeah, in order to kind of meet this goal of what we were trying to use every avenue possible, and a friend of mine, Chris Wolowski, who was kind of a scientist / brewer, he'd like flip-flop back and forth between the two fields, was at the time a scientist and working at this lab who was trying to kind of break into other fields and maybe get some like good publicity, and they're like gave us some analytical data, some CRISPR genetic analysis on some of our barrels. It's because we didn't know exactly what organisms had survived all of this evolution, right? So we were just like throwing everything we had in these barrels, and like whatever survived, but like what actually was doing the work, So it was mainly justification, I think, because what we got back was Pediococcus was the main bacteria, which is what we wanted and what we assumed was happening based on just ropiness developing, which is a function of PDO, and also just the flavor, and lots of different types of Brettanomyces. And there were some other little interesting tidbits in there, but for the most part, it was just really validation that what we had developed was what we thought we had developed. And you can't just necessarily look at that under a microscope unless you're like very trained lab person who can look at bacteria and know what it is.
Anything else to this sour beer production process that you think had set that program apart?
I mean, I think if you want to really just dedicating the time to it, like having the ability to just dedicate the time was what really took that to the next level. It's hard to really develop that as like just a little thing on the side, or just accidentally doing it, like, oh, this beer didn't turn out, let's throw it in a barrel,
right?
And or just like let's sort of see what happened. Like it's
deep intentionality there.
Yeah, if you want to make good sour beer, you're gonna have to spend some time focusing on it. Sure. It can't just be a afterthought, I would say.
And we have another episode where we actually talked to Harrison McCabe right after you were leaving, Beachwood, and we also talk more about that process with him. I think it's fascinating, and again, what you guys were able to do there, and now they continue to do, is still some of the best American sour beer that we've tasted.
Yeah, I will say we love Harrison. And thank you, Harrison. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, Harrison.
Yeah. I just saw him this weekend. So let's again talk about what we teased at the very top, and that's your approach to competition. It's an interesting one. You like many brewers, getting the recognition, of something like this can change the arc of the brewery's progress. That changes the way that other brewers look at you, changes festivals you get invited to, it changes the way that your local customers even look at you. That they might have liked your beer before, but now they feel really good about their choices of patronizing you because they've had this external validation for it. And so, it's not just an ego boost. There are very palpable benefits to the way that everyone from inside the industry and customers then view you with these kinds of things. And you take a very analytical approach to entering competitions. Talk to me about that approach and philosophy, and then some of the strategy involved.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely enjoy doing the competitions, and it's fun, and I love it, but it doesn't justify the bill of entering them to do it just for fun. Like,
right.
If you're not winning, it's kind of hard to justify the cost, especially as a new brewery like us. So we go into it with the idea that we want to win an award, and it doesn't necessarily matter what category it is. Like we need to get on the board, and I definitely come into it from a very analytical, try to be unbiased about what beers I want to win, or what my favorite beer is, or what the customer's favorite beer is. Everyone's like, oh, you should enter this beer because it's my favorite and it's the best in the world. And I'm like, I appreciate that. I love you for it. But I sit down and I'm like, what beer is going to win? Like,
he doesn't sit down. He hobbit holes.
So it comes down to statistics, I think, a lot. It's a game of statistics because there's a lot of different factors as far as many different palates of many different judges, and your beer is being tasted in different order, and a lot depends on that beer that you tasted right before then or after. It just, when it comes down to all these factors, I think it comes down a lot to statistics. So we look at how many entries are in a category. We look at just how close our beer is to style, because at the end of the day, it's more about whether the beer is to style, whether or not the beer is like great beer or not. And then if
it doesn't fit in that style, then it becomes an immediate knockout, from those judges. And so it's got to stay in the game to even have a chance to win.
And a lot of styles are very open-ended too. Like we were talking about American IPA, like how many different opinions are there about what that style even is? Or all these experimental styles, like what does that judge think of this historical or experimental style? Whereas there
leaves
some
a lot of latitude to the judge's interpretation, and you don't want to play with that risk.
Yeah, so there's some beers that are a little more clean and dry, where it's like a Scottish ale. Like, how many different variations can there be, and how much like can you really vary off of that kind of pretty set style guideline? Because it's more of a like that historical beer where it's not as much of something that's evolving necessarily in real time. It's like, this is a beer from the past that kind of has its place already set. So I think we lean more toward those styles. I mean, this is not something that I just like came up with myself too. I've been in the business of winning medals just based on the breweries that I worked for. So it was kind of part of the culture since I got like
Peatsport and Lost Abbey and Beachwood all have pretty aggressive competition entry,
Exactly.
traditions.
So I got to go on that stage pretty early on in my career and get that kind of adrenaline rush. And honestly, it's kind of a lot of it's just chasing that adrenaline high, that dopamine high of winning. And it's a little bit of a lot of the motivation is actually kind of for that.
You
for that
look
big
real good up there,
dopamine
babe.
dump, because it does feel good to win. But it also does help. It helps the business, and I've seen this at the breweries I worked at, how winning medals and getting up there does help you promote your business, and it helps the retailer justify buying your beer, and it helps them push your beer to consumers, and it helps in a lot of ways. So if you can figure out the pieces and can figure out how to do it, it is worth it. But it takes some time and energy. It takes sitting down and really kind of figuring out. And I learned a lot of these things from the places I worked, how to package perfectly. Like, we dedicate a lot of time to packaging, because a lot of people say it's just as much a packaging competition as it is a brewing competition, because the beer has to sit in a bottle for close to 3 months before it gets tasted. So if that beer is oxidized at all, or in any kind of like packaging flaw at all, it's going to be pretty quickly detected by these judges who spend all of their time at their real jobs, like doing that, like analyzing off flavors and tasting beer. So packaging is huge. We dedicate a lot of time. We dedicate pretty much a whole day to just packaging the beer as late as possible, get it like to that drop off point at the last second.
And eliminating oxygen is something that starts in the tank. It's not just, I mean, that's a big piece of the packaging puzzle.
Yeah. We use a lot of CO2 in the bright tanks. We use a lot of CO2. Much more CO2 in packaging are GABF and World Beer Cup beers than we do any other beer.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of time. We spend a lot of time purging each individual bottle and making sure it's going to be held up super well.
Now, you mentioned to me before that to get an idea about what beers have won in the past, you use even Untapped to see how people describe beers, so that you can try to glean some insight in certain categories that you're thinking about entering, about what flavors are impactful to judges.
Yeah, I mean, you never really can know exactly what a judge is looking for, but you can kind of look at trends and be like, okay, this beer has won a bunch in this category, and why is that? Or like, this style isn't like something that's made a lot, but it seems like the beers that are doing this are the ones that are winning. Like, for instance, the cream ale category, just noticed a trend where like Mexican lagers are oftentimes winning in the cream ale category. I thought we make a really good Mexican lager. It's one of our most popular beers. So that one has definitely done well for us in competition. It won gold at this World Beer Cup, and also had made it to the medal round before at GABF for us. So it was just kind of noticing those trends, and just being kind of aware of that. And it's just, I just like geeking out on that stuff. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a math geek. And I had it. So I just like crunching numbers in weird ways like that. Not necessarily like super useful ways, like organizing the books and QuickBooks or anything.
Right.
But if it comes down to like
But if it comes down to beer and medals, Ryan is in.
Well, it makes plenty of sense to me. I mean, if you think about competition entries as a marketing expense, because that's exactly what it is.
That's what we attribute it to.
Right. Yeah. You know, you want to get something for that. You know, you want, and it can't, you know, a hope and a prayer isn't a great way to go into it. Like, you know, put out a bad social media ad campaign and that doesn't return anything. Like, why would you even spend that money? You wouldn't do it if you had bad creative, you know, in an ad. And so it's the same kind of approach to this. Why enter in something where you have a low probability of winning or where there's a lot of variability in the way that a category is judged? Something like, you know, barrel-aged stout. You see you can see the impact of who those judges are from year to year, and which beers win change based on who the judges are and what those preferences are. Like, and that's okay. You know, that's natural. But that creates more variability and risk for you as a brewer if your intention is to get some value out of entering that category.
Yeah. And I will say too, we don't go in expecting 4 gold medals. Like
Hell no, we did not.
We go into every competition praying and hoping for one medal. I don't care what color it is. We want one.
One.
And once you get that one, you're like, whew, and you just can lead back and you're like, we did it. We at least got one, and the rest are bonuses because just getting that one is all that kind of really makes the difference, I think. And just personally from like, and all the energy put in, and
you
just
taught me that. My first competition with him was World Beer Cup, and he had taken over for Noah at Pete's Ports and Company. And I remember sitting there and like the porter placed
probably first.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God, you're going to like win more medals. And he was like, do you know I just won a medal? Like, that's pretty fantastic. Yeah. And I was like, oh. And he's like, we're good now. And I was like, oh, we're good? Okay, we're good. Yeah. We're good.
I talk myself down before every competition. I'm like, sure. I am ready to get shut out. Because I mean, I've been shut out plenty of times. Right. And like, you don't want to get down on yourself. It's at the end of the day, like, it's not end all be all what's going to make your beer good or not. You know, it's a good advertising tool. It's fun to compete with your friends, and I love doing it. But every competition I go in thinking, you know what, I'm going to be totally happy and okay if we don't win anything. Because if you don't, then you're just going to beat yourself up and you're going to be miserable because you're going to get shut out.
I don't make the beer myself, and my favorite part is our friends winning. So I go in with that mentality. Like, if our friends win, we are winning, and all is good.
Yeah. Well, clearly, even though you don't expect it, you know, obviously can't go in thinking you're going to win stuff because, you know, the odds are always against you. I think like 3% of entries end up with a medal, you know, in any giveaway. Like, it's not great odds to bet on. But I love how you work to reduce, you know, to improve the chances, improve your odds, and, you know, going into this, to make it worth going to all the effort that everyone does go to when they create these things. Well, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that insight into you know, the strategy. 4 gold medals at World Beer Cup is absolutely crazy. But now, with more frequent World Beer Cup every year instead of every other year, it's going to be more opportunities for you to repeat.
Yep.
I think that's a good place to bring this to a close. G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. Raw Malt has been a benchmark of quality and consistency for brewers since 1847. Stay up to date on the status of your shipment when you order from Old Orchard. Arrived is the mobile all-in-one solution you need to decrease service friction and increase guest satisfaction, and put SS Brewtech's advances to work in your brew house. Your magazine subscription directly supports our ability to bring you this podcast each week and to go to places like here in Atascadero at Wild Fields, where we can have podcasts in person. I love it. Go to beerandbrewing.com and click on the subscribe button to let us know that this content matters to you. Ryan and Jackie, if people want to learn more about Wild Fields or taste these these brown ales, although I should say the one brown ale that you have in the tap room right now, you have to limit it to only half pours because there's so little of it left. And I swear this is the first time I've ever seen a brewery have to meter out the sale of its brown ale. It's an amazing world that we live in today. absolutely fascinating. Where do they find you, and where do they learn more about Wildfields?
You can find out everything about us, for the most part, at wildfields.com. We have a Find Our Beer app or an online store where you can order direct from us and we'll ship it to you. Other than that, we would love for you to follow us on Wildfields Brewhouse on Instagram and Facebook.
Or come right here to the tap room in Atascadero.
Yeah. You could come here too. Come find us. We're in Atascadero, right off the 101 and 41 at 6907 El Camino Real in Atascadero, California.
Right in between San Luis Obispo and Paso Robles.
A fantastic place to be. Lots of great beer being made in this area of the Central Coast now. And yeah. Thank you all for joining me on the podcast. Cheers.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.